Chapter 11. A Strange Presence. Strena. As quickly as the town had come together in nameless union, it broke apart again into the night, with the quiet exchange of words, the electric passing of news that told of prison break across the river, and slow, steady worry of what was to come. There was an unspoken understanding that even among rest days this would be an exceedingly timid one, to be spent among family and loved ones, and to brace for the coming storm. Which was not to say that the energy that had unified the town had simply faded. In the way that the town had knitted together sort of by a magnetism, it broke apart slowly, into communities, then into families, then into pairs and friends, and then finally, only then, into the night. Many simply would not sleep. Even after the children had made their way back to the haven, and had talked with Mama Maven and prayed and scattered themselves among their groups to talk through their fears and their worries, Strena found herself wide awake, left alone to creep back out onto the hill behind the haven with Guba. With fear pumping through her, her senses were heightened, which only made her more afraid and, in turn, more attentive. It was a bad cycle, and she felt the fear of others whipping around her like the wind. "I know how you feel now, Guba," Strena said, crossing her arms and shivering from the cold. The first signs of the sun rising over the town the morning after brought a lull, and Strena finally felt the energies all swirling around her, from both new and old city, starting to slowly fade. Even after a night like last, the world went on. With a wide yawn, Strena stood and began to walk towards the haven again, hoping to find some sleep in the coming of the daytime. If it had not been just between night and day, when all was still, Strena might not have noticed the life force coming towards town from the river's edge. It was unmistakable, unique. There was someone very interesting approaching town. To Strena, who had lived the majority of her life in Reen and primarily within the bounds of the old city, there were essentially two types of people, at least when it came to energy. There were the colorful, varied sort who made the wild hills and twisting roads and scribbled coast of the old city and beyond their homes. And then there were the beige, uninteresting sort who lived across the river. There had been exceptions, of course, boring Freelanders and a handful of interesting Eterans, but no Eteran in memory seemed to stand out nearly so much as this one. There was a weight to him, a heavy color steeped into the fibers of metal. As had been a habit for years, Strena allowed her curiosity to get the better of her, squirreling down the back of the hill up towards the mountains, where she suspected he might be heading. The stranger moved slowly but deliberately, surrounded by a pair of other life forces that Strena couldn't quite pick out, but she wasn't interested in risking ruining the game to answer that question. Not yet. Even as curious as she was, that stranger's weight put a fear in her, and so she kept her distance. They seemed to be heading away from town, up along the riverside, and so Strena followed, always a hill away, but never allowing the stranger to leave her sixth sense. The strokes he left on the canvas began to pull together. As she listened, she could hear the heavy, wet crunching of boots on the dirt paths. She could smell the scent of the sea and the rhythmic patter of 4 paws on the grass. It was still dark, but lighter than it had been, when the stranger finally stopped, and their light flickered for the first time. Ahead was the rarely used earth temple that sat against the gentle hill in front of the forests. It was old and beautiful, looking down over the old city, but the grasses were well overgrown to nearly head height, a blend of greens fading to yellows that would remain so unless they were trimmed for a gathering. A small path through the tall grasses, well trodden by the old caretaker who lived nearby, led up from the small winding road at the bottom of the hill, which was outlined on one side by a seasonal stream that trickled down out of the mountains, and on the other by a steep decline towards the river. Strena stopped just into the grasses on the hillside on the other side of the stream, watching and listening with her gift, but never daring to look close enough to see the stranger with her eyes. They made their way up to the temple, and then all was silent for a moment. The sudden clatter of stone on metal erupted through the air, startling her so much that she almost dropped Guba, and only silenced the Huna with 2 hands over its mouth. After a pause, the sound came out again in rapid fire. The lock was broken open, and the door had slowly slid inward. Strena crept up the hill, chancing a glance through the brush, and then heard the sound of the old metal swinging shut again, beyond the temple. The stranger had chosen the small storage barn just down the hillside, not the temple itself. The chain and the lock that held the door still hung on the frame, but the stranger had smashed open the door handle, which now twisted lazily against the barn door. What did he want? Anything to steal from the old temple would be in the main building, which was left unlocked anyway. The storage barn was just closed to keep out animals. For a few moments, Strena froze, caught between common sense and curiosity. Then she looked at the barn, back down to the road, and tiptoed down the bridge across the stream. She bent low, following the path up to the temple. There were footprints here, light ones, from a pair of boots and a pair of paws, which didn't explain the 3 life forces. Both boots and paws were muddy, and there were specks of coppery blood that left a scent of danger in the air. As Strena grew closer, she dropped low to the ground to crawl, weaving through the soft grasses that swayed in the growing breeze. Inside, she could sense the 3 life forms more clearly now. 2 that seemed very similar, and then the stranger. The similar ones were clumped together in the back corner of the barn. The other moved, and with a tremendous crack she felt the barn shake. What was he? Drawing upon the training she'd received, Strena reached out and listened, strained. The sound of the wind in the trees, of the creek rushing by, all faded away. She dedicated everything in her gift to listening, to sensing who they were. Slowly, those forms shimmered and took shape. The stranger was a man, with a confusing mix of weight and color that still didn't match the lightness of his feet. And at his side there was a pair of wolves. The stranger was moving, and with a great squeaking cry she started to hear the sound of wood on wood, and red flares as the smell of smoke rose and fire sparked to life. But there was more. Strena searched, digging deeper and trying to figure out what it was that made that man different, made him so interesting. Surely if she could look clearly enough, she could. But as she looked, she noticed something else. They were hurt, all of them, deeply hurt and worn down and growing sick. They were a shadow of what they could be, and they were fading fast. She could smell blood, much more blood now, and that was it. In the innocent way that children care for all living things, she suddenly picked up and sprinted back towards town. They needed help. "Mama Maven! Mama Maven!" she said, as she ran back into the haven, feet pounding on the wooden floors. The old woman groaned at the sound of the child. "Strena, what is it?" Maven asked, tired down to her bones. "There's a man, Mama Maven," she said. "A hurt, bleeding man with 2 wolves. He's in the barn by the old Earth Temple." "Child, there are many bleeding men in our town," Maven said, reaching an arm out to hold Strena in a hug. "It is something we must grow used to. Come, go back to sleep for a little while longer." "Mama, he's not like the fighters or the men of the shadows," Strena said. He's heavy and he's colorful, but he's nothing like them. He needs us." She stammered, frustrated, struggling to find the right words to describe the stranger, but then she felt Maven's arm on her shoulder. "Will you take me there, child?" she asked. Strena's eyes widened, and she nodded, grabbing Maven's hand and taking her down the road. Strena slowed as they arrived. The sun had risen behind the mountains, and now the town was cast in a dim light. It threw her perception, making her wonder if she had not simply imagined the stranger. But as they grew closer, she detected them again, still weak, huddled at the back corner of the barn with a fire burning somewhere inside. As they moved up the path, she stopped. She couldn't sense them moving. "What is it, child?" Mama Maven asked. I'm scared," Strena said. I don't know how they'll be." "You didn't see them?" Mama Maven asked. Strena shook her head. "I didn't want to let them know that I was here," Strena said. Maven frowned. She leant towards trusting those with gifts, even one so young as Strena. "Shall we call them from here?" Mama Maven said. Strena shook her head. "Then how will we tell them we're here?" Maven asked. Without speaking, the girl walked slowly, steadily, finishing her walk up the path and reaching the door of the barn. Their footsteps seemed to crunch even louder here. "Strena, be careful," Maven said, stepping up behind her with a whisper. Strena nodded, stopping. She did not take another step forward. Maven hugged the girl before stepping past her, reaching for the door and slowly bringing it open. With an unavoidable screech, the barn slowly filled with early morning light, and at last the door laid open. The back of the barn was still shrouded in darkness, with the crackling fire at center. "I saw that you were hurt," Strena shouted. "I don't know who you are, but we can help you." Maven turned to the girl, eyes wide at her sudden outburst, taking a step back. There was no movement in the room. "Please, let us help you," Strena repeated. "I can tell you're hurt. You're dying." Like the movement of a great beast off in the forest, there was a shifting in the dark and a low growl that was suddenly cut off by a barked word in an ancient language. Maven grabbed Strena and stepped back, whispering that they had to be ready to run. But no attack came, and as they looked closer, the sun shone through the mountains, casting light into the darkness and bringing with it the forms of the hidden trespassers. They first saw the body of the wolf, silhouetted in the sunlight, cowed by the call of his master, but still poised like a cornered snake, ready to strike. Behind them was the stranger, towering even while seated, leant back against the wall, holding the second wolf in his arms, wrapped tight as if his life depended on protecting the beast. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair wet and splayed across his face, and his left shoulder was wrapped in a torn and bloodied bandage that hung uselessly off to one side. "Can we help you?" Strena called again. The man spoke, this time in Edarin, and Strena did not understand him. He seemed to be apologizing for something. Suddenly, Mama Maven responded to him in Edarin. A question. After a pause, the man spoke again, and Maven nodded. They shared a quick, awkward exchange, and then Maven turned to Strena. "Child, go fetch Mr. Pors," she said. "Go now, quickly." "What did he say?" Strena asked. "We're getting him help," Maven said. "Now come on, grab Mr. Pors and tell him what's happened." When Strena returned, she had brought Pors, who had brought his two brothers, both nearly as tall and broad as he, both with bald heads. But she had also brought Miss Rama, a stern, middle-aged life-weaver with long hair to her waist, from whom she had begun to learn the healing arts. As they arrived, they found Maven standing straight, tensed with her eyes on the door, only to nearly collapse into Pors' arms as he arrived. "Is he still in there?" Pors asked, patting Maven on the back. "The man and the wolves." It took a moment for the old woman to react, but eventually she stood back and nodded. "I haven't heard anything from him since Strena left," she said. "Nothing." "He is still alive," Rama said, eyes closed. "But I can't say for how much longer." Pors raised his voice, speaking in Edarin. There was no response, and with a heave he threw the barn open. Pors was a strong man, and the rusted door shrieked as it flew to the side, letting the light in. The Edarin had shifted the more wounded hound to his left, where it lay sleeping against him, and still sat staring as the wolf to his right growled weakly, once again silenced by a barked word from the Edarin. The fire roared again now, fed by chunks of column and wall broken off by hand. "Why are you here, Edarin?" Pors asked. "Why have you come here?" There was a time of silence as the man thought over his words, and then, just as Pors began to repeat the question, the Edarin answered. "I needed a place to rest," he said. Pors frowned. "Why did you leave the new city?" he asked. You are not welcome here." The man gave only silence as his answer. "You are not in a position to refuse a question," Pors said. "You are hurt and freezing. My people tell me that you are on the edge of death." "I've been here before," the man answered. "I've been here, I've been closer, I've been over the edge and back again. I'm fine." Pors stared at the man. "I will not let you put my people in danger," Pors said. "Give me one reason why we should not throw you and your hounds straight back in the river." The Edarin hung his head, taking a deep breath in and out. "Did you hear me?" Pors said. "Give me an answer. I expect one." The Edarin stretched out, and with a gentle squeeze to his hound's fur, the man slowly used his one working arm to stand up. The male hound growled, but fell silent at another muttered word. The men that Pors had brought with him stepped to flank their brother as the Edarin walked forward, stopping only a few feet away. "One reason? Okay," the Edarin said. "Because that would kill Edda, and it might kill Rowan. But it wouldn't kill me. And I honestly have no idea. I have no idea what I'd do to the people that hurt them." Horace had dealt with a number of threats from shit-talkers and drunk idiots in his time. They'd all been little lies. Exaggerations, grandiosity, showing off. This Eterin, he spoke the truth. Horace was silent. Hearing no answer, the man turned on his heel and began to walk towards the back of the barn, and then immediately collapsed face first on the ground.